Welcome back to the deep dive, everybody.
Mm.
It's incredible
Mm-hmm.
how certain crimes, like even decades later,
Right.
just still grip our collective imagination, right?
Right.
And today, we're going to do a deep dive into two such cases
Okay.
that really kind of shook the
All
1980s.
right.
The Preppy murder in New York City, and then the unsolved Keddie cabin murders in California.
Interesting.
And what's really fascinating to me is how these cases, though they're separated by time and geography,
Mm-hmm.
they both tap into, like, these underlying anxieties of that era.
Yeah.
They expose this darkness lurking beneath
Yeah, I think so.
the surface of affluence and optimism.
That's right. That's right.
So
It's
you've provided us with some really fascinating material on these cases,
Sure.
including My Favorite Murder episode,
Oh, yeah.
where the hosts actually revisit their original coverage from years back.
Right.
So it's like we're getting a glimpse into how these true crime narratives have evolved over time,
Yeah, I think so.
which I think is really, really cool.
It is, I mean, it's interesting to see how those stories were
Yeah.
told then versus now.
Yeah.
And you can glean a lot of insight into sort of changing societal attitudes
Yeah.
and our evolving understanding of these complex issues like, media bias and victim blaming.
Yeah. So like let's go back to 1986.
Okay.
Okay. Picture the streets of New York City,
Okay.
a world of prep school privilege,
Right.
exclusive nightclubs like Dorian's Red Hand Bar. So this setting is so crucial to understanding everything that unfolds here, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is a world where image and status were really everything.
Everything.
Right.
Yeah.
And so at the heart of this story are two young people.
Mm-hmm.
We have Robert Chambers, who is 19 years old,
Right.
described as charismatic,
Mm-hmm.
handsome, despite a history of like petty theft
Okay.
and a growing dependency on drugs and alcohol.
Gotcha.
And we have Jennifer Levin, who's 18 years old.
And everyone describes her as having just a really vibrant personality and big aspirations for college.
Right.
So their backgrounds and how the media portrayed them really played such a significant role
Right.
in shaping public perception of this whole case.
Well, it's interesting because it's, their backgrounds are
Yeah.
completely different.
Yeah.
He comes from this world of privilege,
Right.
and
Right.
and she doesn't.
And she's working her way.
Yeah, she's just a regular girl trying to make good.
Exactly.
So.
So the night of the murder, there's this public confrontation at the bar.
Mm-hmm.
Chambers' girlfriend breaks up with him, and it's possibly fueled by jealousy
Okay.
regarding Levin.
Right.
Later that night, around 4:00 a.m.,
Oh wow.
Chambers and Levin leave the bar together,
Okay.
and they head into Central Park.
Yeah.
And, Central Park in the 80s had a very different reputation than it does today.
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, that was a scary place.
Yeah, it's considered pretty dangerous, especially after dark. Yet it remained a place for these late-night encounters.
Yeah. Well, I guess people still needed to meet and
Yeah.
do what they do.
Yeah,
And they were using the park for that.
right.
Yeah.
Just 2 hours after they enter the park,
Mm-hmm.
Levin's body is discovered.
Okay.
She'd been brutally beaten
Wow.
and partially clothed,
Okay.
and there were signs of a struggle.
Right. So immediately, it's going to make people think
Yeah.
that something nefarious happened.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It wasn't an accident.
Oh,
It
no.
wasn't a heart attack.
Right.
Um.
Now, Chambers,
Right away.
his first story is almost laughable.
Yeah. What's he say?
He claims that he got scratches on his face from his cat,
Oh, come on.
but it quickly comes out that his cat was declawed.
So right away, he's lying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then he changes the story.
Okay. So what's?
He admits to being with Levin,
Mm-hmm.
but he claims that she died accidentally during rough sex.
Oh, so he's going with the rough sex defense?
Right. And this rough sex defense
Yeah.
immediately sparks controversy.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
It's always a dicey defense.
And the prosecution argued that Chambers was intoxicated and enraged,
Mm-hmm.
and that he lashed out violently,
Mm-hmm.
and that Levin's injuries were not consistent
Right.
with his claims.
Sure.
And the media frenzy was just unbelievable.
Well, yeah, because it's got all the elements,
Oh, yeah.
You got the rich kid,
Yeah.
and, and sex and violence.
Yeah. And they paint Chambers
Mm-hmm.
as this handsome, privileged youth who just
Yeah.
made a tragic mistake.
Right.
And then they just completely attack Levin's character.
Mm.
They even fabricated a sex diary that never existed
Oh, wow, really?
to portray her as promiscuous.
That's terrible.
The classic example of how media narratives can just perpetuate these harmful stereotypes and shift blame onto the victim.
Sure, and especially when you're dealing with cases of sexual assault.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But thankfully, the public pushed back.
Good.
There were protests erupting, demanding justice for Levin and calling out these defense tactics. And despite a deadlocked jury, Chambers eventually accepted a plea deal for manslaughter.
Wow.
And served 15 years.
That's not enough.
But here's what's chilling.
What?
Even after the plea deal, a home video surfaced showing Chambers, like, mockingly choking himself.
Oh, jeez.
And twisting a doll's head off, saying, "Oops, I think I killed it."
It's like he's making fun of the whole thing.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it raises all these questions about, like, his remorse and the sincerity of his claims.
Right. I mean, like, was he really sorry?
Yeah.
Or is this just, an act?
So the Preppy murder left such a scar. I mean, it really highlighted how power and privilege can impact the perception of a crime.
And then, of course, the victim
Right.
pays the price.
Always.
Yeah.
But it also sparked these really important conversations about sexual assault and consent.
Right.
And the dangers of victim blaming. Conversations that continue to this day.
Well, that's good. I mean, it brought these issues to the forefront.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now let's head over to the West Coast.
Okay.
To the unsettling mystery of the Keddie cabin murders.
Oh, yeah. This is a creepy one.
Oh, it's so creepy.
Yeah.
1981.
Okay.
Keddie, California, which is this small, isolated mountain town with a really dark past. This case is fascinating because it blends traditional true crime with the rise of online sleuthing.
Right.
Particularly through communities like Reddit.
Oh, yeah.
Who've kept this case alive and even contributed to it being reopened.
Well, that's good. I mean, it shows what can happen when a lot of people get interested.
It really demonstrates, like, the power of collective online investigation, wouldn't you say?
I think that, it's amazing what can be uncovered.
Yes.
When you have dedicated individuals focusing on something.
Right.
And and they're not limited by the resources of, say, a police department.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so picture this. April 1981.
Okay.
Glenna Sue Sharp, her 15-year-old son John, and his friend Dana Wingate are found brutally murdered in Cabin 28.
Wow.
But Sue's 12-year-old daughter Tina vanishes.
Oh, my God.
Without a trace.
That's scary.
Yes.
Yeah.
The crime scene is so disturbing.
What did they find?
They were bound with medical tape and electrical wire.
Oh, wow.
Bludgeoned with hammers.
Oh, my gosh.
And repeatedly stabbed.
Jeez.
And then to make things even more complex, 3 young boys who were sleeping in another room were completely unharmed.
Oh, wow.
That's
really weird.
It's like something straight out of a nightmare.
It is. It's like, why were those births spared?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to make matters worse, the initial police investigation was just riddled with errors.
Really?
Crucial evidence.
Oh, no.
Including audio recordings of an anonymous tip, potentially related to Tina's disappearance, just vanished.
Oh, come on.
So these missing tapes have fueled speculation about a possible cover-up. Or, at the very least, gross negligence.
Yeah, or incompetence.
Right.
Right. I mean, you would think they would hold on to that kind of evidence.
You think.
Yeah.
Either way, their absence has really hampered the investigation all these years.
Right. They may have had a clue on those tapes, and it's gone.
3 years later, Tina's remains are found.
Oh, wow.
Confirming that she was also murdered.
Jeez.
Suspicion fell on 2 men.
Okay.
Martin Smart, a neighbor with connections to the local sheriff.
Interesting.
And John Boubaid.
Okay.
A known criminal with ties to the FBI.
Oh, wow.
So these connections to law enforcement and potentially organized crime make this so murky.
Well, yeah, you have to wonder if they were protected somehow.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes you question, was there an effort to obstruct justice?
Right.
Or to protect those involved?
That's right.
Here's another twist.
Okay.
Both men died of natural causes.
Oh.
Before they could be investigated or charged.
Oh, so they got away with it if they did it.
Right. It's like the trail went cold just as it was getting warm.
Right.
But thankfully, due in part to the efforts of these online sleuths,
good.
The Plumas County Sheriff's Office reopened the case in recent years.
Wow. So there's hope.
Yes.
Yeah.
It really is a testament to the power of persistence.
It is. And the internet
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
All these people focusing on this.
Right. So one of the most haunting aspects of this case is the lack of a clear motive.
Right.
I mean, who was the intended target? Was it Sue Sharp?
Yeah.
And if so, why? Did she know something she shouldn't have?
Right.
Was this a personal vendetta or something even more sinister?
I mean, what was going on in Keddie?
Right.
What was she involved in?
And why was Dina Wingate's body seemingly treated so differently?
Yeah, that is strange.
Right. The other victims were brutally attacked, but his body was discovered with a cushion placed beneath his head.
That's weird.
Was this an act of familiarity?
Yeah, like they knew him or...
Right. Or a deliberate attempt to mislead investigators.
Right, or throw them off the scent.
Yeah. The inconsistencies in this crime scene just deepen this mystery.
It makes you wonder, you know, what their motive was,
Yeah.
and if they knew any of these victims.
Exactly.
Oh.
Now, there's also the chilling possibility of a connection to the notorious serial killer.
Okay.
Leonard Blake, one of the surviving boys,
Yeah.
drew a sketch of the man he saw around the time of the murders.
Okay.
And it bears a striking resemblance to Lake.
Oh, wow.
And so while it's circumstantial, the potential link to Lake, who was active in California during that period,
Right.
can't be ignored.
Well, no, if he was there...
Right.
And the drawing matches... You got to look into that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He and his accomplice, Charles Nang, were known to target families. And they were incredibly brutal in their crimes.
Yeah. So
this is a very unsettling possibility.
You know, it makes you think about
Yeah.
the vulnerability of a place like Keddie.
Exactly.
Isolated, limited resources.
Right. And potentially corruption within law enforcement.
That's right. It's like the perfect place for a predator
Exactly.
to operate.
That's right. And despite the complexities and the passage of time, many still believe that someone out there holds the key to unlocking this truth about what happened.
Right. And I mean, hopefully those people will come forward.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, you know, hopefully with this renewed investigation and the efforts of these online communities, that justice for these victims will be served.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, before we move on to part 2
Okay.
of our deep dive, where we're going to delve even deeper into the theories and evidence and the enduring mysteries of these cases,
Right.
I want to hear from you what details or theories have stood out to you so far.
Well, the thing that gets me is the Keddie case.
Yeah.
You know, with those boys
I know.
that were unharmed.
It's so strange.
It's just so strange.
Yeah.
You have to wonder why.
Yeah.
Why them?
Yeah.
Why were they spared?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, was it just because they were asleep?
Yeah, or did they know the
Right.
killers?
Or were the killers trying to protect them for some reason?
Yeah. Why?
It's a mystery.
It's a huge mystery.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, I keep coming back to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I do too. And it makes you think, like,
Yeah.
what was going on in their minds?
Exactly.
Yeah. And what were their motives? Like, what was the purpose of sparing those boys? Yeah. Were they just, you know, an afterthought?
Right.
Or was it deliberate?
Yeah. There's just so many questions.
Yeah, a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess in part 2, we're going to try to explore some of the possible answers.
We're going to try to get a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
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 So we'll see what we find.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. It's remarkable how these cases, despite occurring on opposite coasts, resonate with like simile themes, you know, of media influence and societal biases.
You're absolutely right. And revisiting them through the lens of these podcasts adds another layer, don't you think?
It does. It does. It makes you think about how,
Yeah.
you know, how are these stories told?
Yeah.
What impact do they have? What are the ethical considerations?
Exactly. And it really highlights the evolution of true crime as a genre.
Right.
Right. As awareness of sensitive issues like victim blaming and exploitation has grown.
Right.
So too has the responsibility of those who tell these stories.
Yeah. That's right. You have to be careful.
Right.
You know, you can't just throw these stories out there.
You can't just exploit.
Without considering the consequences.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, something that really struck me while I was listening to the My Favorite Murder episode was the host's reflection on their earlier coverage.
Right.
And they seemed to acknowledge that their tone and language back then might have been insensitive by today's standards.
Well, sure. I mean, things changed. What was acceptable back then is not now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it demonstrates a growing awareness within the true crime community of the need to approach these stories with greater sensitivity and respect for the victims and their families.
That's right. These are real people with real lives.
Right.
And, we have to.
Not just entertainment.
Be mindful of that.
Yeah. It's a delicate balance, isn't it?
It is.
Acknowledging the historical context while also ensuring that we don't perpetuate these harmful stereotypes.
Right.
Or trivialize the real human impact of these crimes.
That's right. Sometimes it's hard to, walk that line.
It is.
Yeah.
But it's important.
But it's important. It requires constant reflection and a willingness to adapt.
Yes.
As our understanding of these complex issues evolves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's dive a little deeper into some of the specific questions that these cases raise.
Right.
Starting with the Preppy murder.
Okay.
You mentioned the controversial rough sex defense used by Chambers attorneys.
Right. So the rough sex defense is essentially, arguing that the victim consented to a level of violence that ultimately led to their death.
Right.
So in this case, Chambers is saying that Jennifer Levin died accidentally during consensual rough sex.
Right. But the prosecution really challenged that.
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, there's no evidence of that.
Right. They pointed to the evidence of Chambers' rage and argued that Levin's injuries were not consistent with his claims.
Yeah, and, a lot of times in these cases, the defense will try to smear the victim.
Exactly. And make it seem like they were somehow responsible.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's just not.
It's not, right?
Right.
And the media just further complicated this whole thing.
Oh, of course, because the media loves
a
salacious story.
Yeah. Their portrayal of Chambers as this privileged youth who made a tragic mistake.
Right.
Contrasted with their portrayal of Levin. Just fueled pre-existing biases.
Right. And it's just so unfair.
Right.
To the victim.
Yeah, and it just made it so much harder to have an objective conversation.
Exactly.
About consent, power dynamics.
Right.
And the legal complexities of sexual assault.
That's right. And so much of this goes back to societal attitudes about women,
It's so frustrating.
It is. It's frustrating and it's sad.
Yeah. But thankfully, those protests that erupted demanding justice for Levin really demonstrated the power of public pressure to hold the media and the legal system accountable.
It shows that people still care about justice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's shift our focus now.
Okay.
Back over to the Keddie cabin murders.
All right.
And those missing police tapes.
Yeah, where'd they go?
I know, it's so troubling.
Why?
I mean, how do key pieces of evidence in such a brutal crime just disappear?
Well, somebody must have taken them.
Right.
But who?
Right. And why?
And why?
It really raises questions about the integrity of that initial investigation.
It does. It makes you wonder if there was a cover-up.
Yeah, or at least some sort of...
Or at least incompetence, yeah.
Right, like maybe they just didn't think it was that important at the time.
Because it was just, some kids in a cabin.
Right, and it makes you wonder if those tapes had crucial information about Tina Sharp's whereabouts.
Right.
And it just adds to the suspicion.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we have that strange discrepancy in how Dana Wingate's body was treated compared to the others.
I know. Why would they put a cushion under his head?
I know. It's such a weird detail.
Right. I mean, was it somebody who knew him?
Right.
I mean...
It's so perplexing.
It is. It makes you wonder...
Right.
About the motive.
Yeah, like, were they trying to make it look like something it wasn't?
Right. Like, was he the intended victim?
Right.
And the others were just collateral damage?
Exactly.
We don't know.
Oh, I just don't know.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of these prevailing theories surrounding the Keddie cabin murders.
Okay.
You mentioned the potential for a personal vendetta against Sue Sharp.
Right. Well, I mean...
Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. Sure. So some people believe that Sue may have been the primary target.
Okay.
Maybe because of a personal dispute.
Okay.
Or maybe she was involved in drug activity. Or perhaps she witnessed something she shouldn't have.
Right. And the fact that Keddie had this reputation,
right.
this darker side.
It was a small town.
Yeah.
People knew each other.
Yeah.
There were whispers of drug trafficking and other illegal activities.
Right, and so maybe she just got mixed up.
Right, maybe she knew too much.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the remote location and the kind of transient population of that town probably made it easier.
Right, nobody's paying attention to what's going on out there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, there's also the theory of a botched robbery or a crime of opportunity.
Right, so that theory suggests that the killers may not have specifically targeted the Sharps. They just saw an opportunity for a robbery or another crime, and it escalated into violence.
But that brutality at the crime scene.
Yeah, but that's the thing that doesn't make sense. I mean, why so much violence?
Right.
If it was just a robbery.
Yeah, it suggests something more.
Right, like there was some...
Like a deeper motive.
Rage.
Yes.
Some anger.
Maybe revenge.
Revenge.
Or just a sadistic thrill.
Yeah, I mean, there are people like that out there.
There are.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. And then, of course, there's that chilling possibility of the connection to Leonard Lake.
Right. Well, I mean, if he was in the area.
Right, and that sketch.
And that sketch.
Drawn by one of the surviving boys. Really resembles him.
You gotta look into that.
Yeah, and Charles Nang.
Right, his partner.
Yes, targeted families and were incredibly brutal.
Yeah. I mean,
and so this is a very unsettling possibility.
It's scary to think that somebody like that could just be
out there.
Out there, yeah. Doing these horrible things.
It highlights how certain communities, particularly those that are isolated or have limited resources, can be more vulnerable to predators like Lake.
Well, yeah, because the police don't pay as much attention.
Right. They don't have the resource.
We're not as responsive.
Exactly. And so it's just this perfect storm.
Right. It creates an environment where this can happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the Keddie cabin murders are really like a jigsaw puzzle with all these missing pieces.
Yeah. And we may never know
the
full story.
Every time you think you're getting close to the truth, another layer is revealed.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder.
It does. It makes you wonder if, maybe we're not supposed to know.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe some things are just better left unsolved.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's part of what makes it so compelling.
It is.
Right.
Yeah. It's like
this constant need to try to figure it out.
You want to know what happened?
We want to put the pieces together.
Right. Yeah. Even though we never will have all the pieces.
Yeah. And it challenges us to think critically and to consider multiple perspectives.
Yeah.
And to acknowledge that sometimes, even with our best efforts, the truth may just remain elusive.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So before we wrap up part 2 of our deep dive and move on to our final thoughts,
all right,
I'm curious to know what's been resonating most with you about these cases.
Well, I think both cases really reveal the power dynamics that are at play in society.
Yes.
Whether it's the influence of wealth and privilege.
In the Preppy murder.
Or the vulnerability of a marginalized community.
In Keddie. That's such a great observation.
It's like society is stacked against certain people.
It is.
Yeah.
And these crimes aren't just isolated incidents.
Right.
But they're reflections of these broader societal issues. That's right.
That we need to grapple with.
Absolutely.
And it challenges us to examine our own biases and to question the narratives that we're presented with.
Right.
And to strive for a more just and equitable world where these tragedies are less likely to occur.
Absolutely. And, sometimes you feel helpless.
Yeah.
But we're not.
Right.
We can all do something to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it starts with
awareness and speaking out.
And being kind.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So as we prepare to move into part 3 of our deep dive, where we're going to offer our concluding thoughts and reflections, I want to leave our listeners with this question to ponder.
Okay.
If we were investigating these cases, what avenues would we explore?
Yeah. What would we do differently?
What questions would be asking?
Right. How would we approach it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
What would we do? That's a good question.
Yeah.
Something to think about.
It is.
Yeah.
It's incredible how these cases, even decades later, still have this power to unsettle us and captivate us.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It speaks to our fascination with true crime.
Right.
But I think it also speaks to a deeper need to understand, to try to make sense of chaos, to try to find meaning in these senseless acts.
Exactly. And as we've been discussing these cases, I keep coming back to this idea of media narratives.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, even with all the facts laid out, the way the stories are told, the details that are emphasized,
or the details that are left
or
out.
omitted, can really shape public perception.
Well, absolutely. I mean, in the Preppy murder case, the media initially focused on Robert Chambers.
Right.
His prep school background, his quote-unquote promising future.
Right.
And it almost overshadowed the brutality of the murder.
You know, Jennifer Levin was an afterthought.
Like she was barely even part of the story.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
And it took a lot of public pressure.
Yeah.
And, protests.
Right. People demanding that her side of the story be heard.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then in the Keddie cabin murders, the lack of media attention, especially in the early years.
Right. Oh, I mean, Keddie was out in the middle of nowhere.
Right. It was isolated.
Nobody cared.
Yeah. And it makes you wonder if that contributed to the case going cold.
Well, yeah. I mean, if the media is not paying attention, then the police aren't going to really put a lot of effort into it.
And it wasn't until the internet, and specifically that Reddit community, picked up the thread that we saw any real momentum.
That's right. And it shows the power of the internet. In
solving these cold cases.
Right. Or at least bringing attention to them.
Right. It really does raise this question, though, about, whose stories get told and whose voices are amplified.
Exactly.
And both of these cases highlight the need for critical media literacy.
Yeah. I mean, you can't believe everything you read.
You can't.
Right. Right.
You have to.
You have to question everything.
Question your sources.
Yeah, and seek out multiple perspectives.
That's right.
And it reminds us that behind the headlines and the sensationalized details...
Right, these are real people.
These are real people.
With real lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so as we engage with true crime, whether it's through podcasts or documentaries or online discussions...
Right.
It's so essential to approach these stories with empathy and respect.
That's right.
And to remember that they represent real human suffering.
That's right. It's easy to get caught up in the mystery and the drama.
Right.
But we have to remember that
real people, these were real people.
Were hurt.
Whose lives were destroyed.
Yes.
Yeah.
So before we wrap up our deep dive today,
okay,
I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder.
All right.
Both of these cases, though they're separated by time and circumstance, they raise questions about power and privilege.
Right.
And the systems that often fail to protect the vulnerable.
Yeah.
And so what responsibility do we have as individuals and as a society to challenge these systems and to advocate for justice?
That's a good question.
Not just for the victims that we hear about.
Right.
But for all those whose stories may never be told.
That's right. We have to speak up.
We do.
For those who can't speak for themselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's a really powerful quotient.
It is.
And I hope it stays with our listeners long after they finish this episode.
Me too.
And, we may never have all the answers in these cases.
Right. Some mysteries are never solved.
But by engaging with them thoughtfully, by questioning assumptions,
right,
and by seeking the truth,
yes,
we can honor the victims.
Absolutely.
And strive to create a world where these tragedies are less likely to happen.
That's right. And that's what's important. You know, it's not about solving the mystery. It's about
learning from it.
Learning from it.
And making the world a better place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Beautifully said.
Thank you.
And on that note, we want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope it sparked your curiosity and encouraged you to think critically. And to maybe even delve deeper into the complexities of these cases.
Yeah. Keep searching for the truth.
Yes. And the world of true crime.
Absolutely.
So until next time, stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay informed.
Stay informed.
And as always, stay safe.
Stay safe.